Welcome to the Profitable Farmer Podcast, where it's all about increasing the profitability of your farm by working smarter, not harder.
G'day everyone. Welcome once again to Profitable Farmer. I hope this season's unfolding well for you. I have a shout out to Ellie and Tom Webb, thanking you for the introduction to our next guest. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. David Anthony to you all. David is a doctor of philosophy, has a master's of applied psychology, sports and exercise, a grad diploma in psychology and a bachelor in psychology. I'm really excited about this conversation. I think we've got a really important issue to touch on that hopefully will be incredibly relevant to many of you. David is the CEO and co-founder to Mental Health, which is a network of psychologists supporting, in particular, men, but men and women and children across Australia. I think it's a really important project, Dave, that you've founded, and I can't wait to hear more about it and to share your story with our farming community. So welcome to Profitable Farmer.
Thanks very much, Jeremy. Great to be here.
Just by way of introduction, Dave is passionate about changing the way men engage in therapy and improving their quality of life. With over 15 years experience in corporate, sport, defence, health, government and academic environments, he's worked in numerous male-dominated environments and provides specialist psychological services in a way that's identifiable and reliable. I love that introduction, mate. And thank you very much for being with us. Just to kick us off, can you tell us a little bit about mental health and how it came to be and what inspired you to bring this project into reality?
Yeah, sure, mate. So mental health came to be largely as a result of my experience as a psychologist, and the other two co-founders, shout out to Dave Burrows and Luke Foster, who, like me, are psychologists and have had a range of experiences. Luke, I met in the army and worked in a few different postings with, and Dave also did a little bit of reserve work, but has a much greater sort of level of experience across sort of corporate environments as well. And we got talking about this notion of our experience as psychologists and how the way that we engage with men was sort of, was different to the way that we were trained, and what was effective with men was different to the way that we were taught, that we were educated and, went through the process of becoming psychologists. So we started to look at the research. What does that tell us about a gendered approach to therapy? Is there sort of a good evidence base, if you like, to support this notion of starting something up that sort of targets a specific demographic or men specifically? And to our surprise, I guess, there was a fair bit of research out of it and out there about it, and a lot of it's been done sort of out of Australia as well, which is really cool. So we had this concept, we had this evidence base to say, well, we need to create something that meets the needs of men. Our vision is about helping men to become better partners, brothers, fathers, mates, colleagues, leaders, and friends. Or mates and friends are the same thing. I got that wrong, but this notion of not just improving the life of men, but those around them. And for us, we started to look at, well, what are the barriers that get thrown up for men engaging in mental health support or professional support, and some of those were sort of this perception of time. The time it takes to go to a GP or even travel to a medical appointment, the time it takes for away from the primary work role, away from family, whatever it might be. And the other was as we continue to hear, sort of this perception of stigma. Well, I don't want to talk about my mental health. That doesn't really align with what a man should be from a masculinity's perspective. And so mental health was born. It's a one-on-one video telehealth service. So, we reduce the impost and travel. We take psychology to a time and a place that best suits the individual. So, there's no awkward sitting in a waiting room where there's a stack of new ideas beside you and that are well worn and not of interest. We allow people to engage with us at a place that is more comfortable, whether that's the office, home, out in the car, sitting in the ute somewhere outside a work site, or on a farm. That was where we thought about it. And funnily enough, it was pre-COVID. And COVID, if it's done one thing positive, it's allowed people to feel more comfortable with this environment.
How did you come to the world of psychology, Dave, way back when? And how's the journey been?
Yeah, look. So I got into psychology. I was involved in a Rotary Youth Leadership Awards program when I was, 19, and it was a week leadership and personal development program run at where I grew up, just on the south side of Brizzy. And Ryla, as it's otherwise known, has various connotations around Australia. But this was a week-long program once a year, and I went as a participant at the request of my boss at the time, as a cadet draftsperson, drawing structural steel, and loved it. Got a lot out of the program and wanted to continue to be involved. And so, funnily enough, I applied to be a part of the leadership team to go back the following year, and was accepted and was involved in sort of the full transition process for the next 3 years as a part of the leadership team. And we got to work with a couple of psychologists as a part of that leadership team. And so that's where I got introduced to psychology. Couldn't have told you what it was at school. And what I liked about this notion of psychology is, one, yeah, sure, it's a great opportunity to help those that may need support, but it's also a really great opportunity to learn about why we do what we do, from a behavioural perspective. And for me, that was what attracted me most. It was like, well, I'm learning about this stuff and I can see how it applies to, my own behaviour, to the behaviour of the people around me, and in a weird sort of way, sort of helped explain a little bit about, why we do the things that we do.
Perfect. So today, would you mind just describing the mental health business, the team size, and your reach? Is that okay?
Yeah, mate. So today we've been operating for 16 months, so not a huge amount of time. We launched at the end of September in 2020. Yes, 2020. I keep forgetting it's 2022. And so Mantle offers a couple of different types of services. It offers its clinical services, which is your traditional psychology. It offers its performance services, which are more about sort of a targeted approach. This notion of working on a specific area to take yourself from good to great. Whereas our clinical services are about this notion of working from moving from not so good to good. We have 20 psychs that operate from various places in Australia. Being a video telehealth platform, there's great opportunity for reach, and we cover sort of outside of traditional work hours as well, which can sometimes be a little bit difficult to find psychs that'll do that. And so, as we continue to build our service and build our team, we'll continue to look for those opportunities to look at after hours services and also a little bit of additional weekend work, which we offer currently.
I think it's a wonderful business model and offering. My perception is that psychologists and counsellors and the sort of support you provide is in short supply and often hard to come by, certainly in regional Australia. I know as a business coach, I've wanted to find an access point for some of my clients to get psychological support. And there's been a waiting list and it's been challenging. So it's great to know, and I'm really excited about the fact that your team of 20 psychologists can kind of be there and that people can get, rapid response, which is, so often what they need in times of adversity.
Yeah, thank you, mate. It's this is one of the other barriers, right? Barriers to good mental health support, good psychological support is, this perception of long waiting lists, and for specific sorts of services, yeah, sure, there's big waiting lists. If you want a bulk billing service, it's likely that you're going to have to wait. But what we're seeing across all of health is this notion that if you want to pay for good service, there's a requirement to, pay a little bit extra for that. And I think, for us, not being the only video telehealth psychology service, but being the only video telehealth psychology service primarily for men, there's other businesses out there that still have availability that operate this way. And I think, for your listeners that are spread to the four corners, I don't know if you could say that about Australia, but spread wide across Australia, the opportunity to engage with those sort of services, and if you're getting told that by a GP or whatever it may be that there's a really long waiting list to see a psych, I'd encourage you to reach out to me and we can look at how we might be able to support you, or at least link you up with a service that can also support you. That's something that I like to try and challenge the perception out there about.
While we're talking about perceptions, I feel like in America, everyone's got a counsellor or a coach, or it's commonplace perhaps. There seems to be, my perception anyway of their culture is that it's more commonplace. I feel like in Australia, it's, and I might be wrong in this, Dave, so I'm interested in your comment, that people who need psychs are either broken or weak, and I'm neither of those. So, I don't need that sort of help. I'd kind of reckon, for many men, maybe in regional and rural, that there's a thought that it's a sign of weakness to get psychological support. I'd like to challenge that, but I'd love your comment on whether you think that's accurate or otherwise.
Yeah, look, I think there's a level of accuracy to it, Jeremy. I think, again, I reflect on my own experience, the background in the Army, and just the shift that I saw in the period that I was in the Army full time for, the change in perception about engaging in support. But, also more broadly, this notion of masculinity is more pervasive in Australian society. We're seen as, or blokes specifically are seen as, those that should be able to deal with stuff. They should be able to cop what comes at them. They shouldn't need additional support. And so when we're raised with those with those expectations placed upon it as what it means to be a man, that requires change. And I'm thinking back to a conversation that I had with Ellie and Tom when we were in New Zealand in November of 2020. The way that we talk about mental, and I think the way that we sort of talk about this notion of those that use psych support for a more from a proactive preventative approach, is it definitely exists here in Australia, but we might describe the individuals utilising those services, ones that are more sort of the more informed and insightful versions of the stereotypical Australian male. And we're seeing that change. There's still a long way to go, but one of the things that I think when I learn more about your audience and the people working with FOA is, is this notion that they want to get better. They want to get better at the way they operate. They want to get better at the way they live. And, for me, there's a myriad of ways to do that. And it's a constant process to find out how you do it better.
Well said. I think I'm always pleasantly surprised and amazed by just how open-minded our listener group is. And certainly our clients at FOA, just their thirst for knowledge, their open-mindedness around getting the right people around them and their desire to improve. It is so impressive. And so I think we're speaking to a community of very open-minded people on this podcast. And so that stereotype might not apply, but I think it certainly seems to be, or feels like to me, where we've come from. And I agree. I feel like there's sort of a bit of a shift in consciousness, or a more open-minded approach that perhaps men are making and taking to get the right people around them so that they can improve in all areas of their life.
Yeah. And to add to that, I think, one of the really interesting insights is this notion that when we talk about our experience, and we talk about this process of, or this perception of sort of being weak or not manly to seek help. What we're actually doing by seeking help and then talking about it with those close to us and our social supports is we're actually normalising the experience. Normalising this process that we experience difficulty, but also normalising this process that we engage in support to improve our quality of life and our general well-being. And that, for want of a better expression, modelling, and normalising the process it goes a long way to change other people's behaviour, and we can't underestimate the importance of that.
I think, to your point, it's a very courageous step to do that, and it will inspire others if you are, willing to make that stance to be better and to get people around you. I love that comment that I heard Ash Barty's coach make the other day on a podcast, that there are two types of leaders. There are leaders that think that being vulnerable is a weakness, and then there are leaders who think that being vulnerable is a strength. And, I think that second comment, if you're willing to get the people around you and open up to them and explore ourselves and how we can improve, then I think it's absolutely a really strong sign of leadership and a sign of strength. Would you agree that there's real strength in being vulnerable?
Oh, 100%. And, coming from the background that I do and having been fortunate enough to have the time to do the research that I've done, there's nothing but support for this notion of vulnerability as the key to this label of resilience that gets thrown around, and that can be misunderstood. But the most... If we think about the people in our lives that we might consider resilient for the way they behave, the way they act, the way they talk, whatever it might be, they're usually the ones that have the capacity to be vulnerable. They have the capacity to learn from those difficult experiences. And at its core, that's what resilience is. It's not so much experiencing adversity, but it's learning from the experiences, both good and bad, as a means to protect yourself against similar experiences in the future. Or move through those more effectively.
Nice one. So would you, while we're on it, just give us a bit more insight into how we build resilience? You've touched on what it is there, but maybe just a bit more there on what it is to be resilient and how people can make a first step in building up their resilience. I find this topic really fascinating.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, it's almost a topic in itself. But how do I summarize it succinctly? So, getting away from how we might define it, there's a range of definitions out there, and sometimes they're not always helpful. But the way that we, that I like to think about resilient is again thinking about those people that I see as resilient, whether it be in my family, in my workplace, the people in my social network that are closest to me. What is it that they do regularly? How is it that they talk? How is it that they move through those difficult periods? Because at the end of the day, resilience is a set of behaviours. It's a set of habits that we do frequently that protects us against those difficult periods. And so if we were to pull it apart, if we were to look at ways that that we might try and conceptualize the pieces of resilience or the factors of resilience, you look at social support as being a critical aspect. And again, thinking about those resilient people in your life, there's probably an element there that that they have a good support network. And that's not a huge amount of people. It's just people that they can know they can rely on in difficult times. We talk about values-oriented behaviour. So knowing what's important to me and ensuring that I'm doing things that regularly align with those values. Because if I'm doing that, I'm more likely to be enjoying those aspects of my life. The other consideration is this notion of sort of problem solving. So, do I use different problem-solving approaches as opposed to, just persist with emotion-focused problem-solving, which is, all the stuff that we might do to lessen the emotional effect. Or when the time is right, do I also engage in the problem-focused stuff where I'm actually trying to break down the situation and see how I can fix it? And the other one, which again isn't necessarily, what am I trying to say? It's quite common knowledge. Is how do we maintain our physical health and well-being? How is our diet? How is our sleep? And noting that sleep is sometimes very different depending on what stage of life you're in and what stage of life your family's in. What are we doing from a physical activity perspective? And the final point is, what are we doing away from work that sustains us? And noting that work, depending on where we are and what we do, can be an all-encompassing thing. The importance of taking a break and getting away from that on a semi-regular basis, even if it's just briefly, is critical to maintain your capacity to perform in that environment.
That's such a cracking summary. Thank you. What a great set of points. Awesome. So I'll reflect back personally, and I've shared this story with our listeners before, but when I arrived in my mid-20s to a point of anxiety, low self-esteem, lack of confidence, and ultimately kind of situational depression, getting psychological help wasn't natural or wasn't a normal thing to do, and it wasn't something that I'd really heard of, but I'm so grateful that I'd sort of stumbled upon and reached out to and got the help that I needed. And I reflect now, years later, as it being an absolute turning point in my life. And so, for those people listening that, if you're not on your A game, or if you're on your A game and wanting to, as you say, Dave, move from good to great, or if something's not right, one of the best things you can do is change your environment. And I think the best way that we can change our environment is to get the right people like Dave or his psychology team around you, so you can explore things differently and look for different avenues to move forward that aren't necessarily obvious to you in the heat of battle. What would your comment be there, Dave?
Oh, yeah, basically. I think, my experience, the research out there, I think about the people that engage with our service, it always, I shouldn't say always, but it often sort of points to this notion of, I engage when I don't have any other options. And I think the true opportunity for growth is engaging upstream, if you like, and looking for ways that if things aren't quite humming the way that you'd like them to be, what are the ways to get on top of that early, as opposed to further down the track. To your example, Jeremy, if we're in our mid-20s and sort of just trying to crack on, even when there's periods of difficulty. There's this great saying, I can't remember who it came from. I'd love to say it was mine, but it's not. What you resist persists. And when it comes to periods of difficulty, I think that's incredibly true. Things don't normally change if we ignore them. They usually get worse. So, our team, this. When I think about the team that we've put together and the way that we've trained them to refine their already impressive skills, over 10 years experience as psychs, looking at a program to improve their understanding and awareness of, a gendered approach to therapy, those sort of things place them really well to work with whatever it is that you're coming to us with. And, whatever stage of life that might be, I think getting more comfortable with engaging with professionals outside of all the other things that you're doing is a necessary process.
Absolutely. Dave, I might make the point that mental health isn't only for men. So I might get you to speak to this, that your team also very much support women and children in families, whilst your focus is perhaps primarily on supporting men. Just to those ladies and the younger generation perhaps out there listening, absolutely mental health can support you as well. That said, Dave, you mentioned that the research that you did with your fellow directors indicated that men are wired a bit differently, and we operate somewhat differently and learn differently and communicate differently. Would you mind speaking to your spin on that research or your take on how it is that men are wired differently?
Yeah. To your point about seeing all genders, we definitely do. And, whilst our psychs have experience in sort of male-oriented environments and, have specialist training in, dealing with men, they also have backgrounds as psychologists that have allowed them an opportunity to work with all genders, and youth as well to an extent. The research tells us when we talk about men being wired differently, and I don't want to sort of categorize it that bluntly, because I think that can sometimes be a hindrance. So the way that we like to talk about it is this notion that we've learned differently. And sure, there's a little bit of stuff up here that brain scans tell us that male brains are different to female brains, but at the end of the day, a lot of it comes from the environment in which we grow up and the behaviours that we've observed in the people around us, and that gives us a frame of reference for how we should behave. For mine, the three main differences when we talk about the way that men better engage with mental health support or psych support, or what benefits them more effectively is, this notion of sort of perceived autonomy, right? So we might break that down to being, feeling like they have a say in what's being covered in the sessions, what the expectations of sort of the treatment are, what are the roles and the goals. The other part of it is this notion of behavioural activation. So no surprises here, and we stereotypically like to be active, and often when we're experiencing periods of ill health and illness, that physical activity is one of the first things that we start to do less of. And again, like if you're working in an incredibly active role, that's not to say that you're not being physically active, but I would also say that, what are the other things that might be required there? And the third consideration is this notion of a strengths-based approach. And for the coaches that are listening in out there, you're probably pretty familiar with that. But the way we might describe it is, how do we ensure, as opposed to sort of and I say in inverted commas, the traditional approach to psychology is focusing on all these areas, these weaknesses that aren't, that have may be attributed to why you are where you are. We focus on how do we leverage the strengths. What are the things that are working? What are the aspects that we might be able to work on that is protective against some of those other areas that are proving challenging, and how do we sort of, this isn't a technical term, but how do we use that to spin up the motivation to start to change more sort of more wholesale aspects of your life to get you going again.
So, to your point, I don't want to stereotype or put people in boxes, but you've worked in corporate, you've worked in elite sport, you've worked in defence, you've probably worked with farm business owners before. Are we really very different across all of those disciplines, or are we somewhat similar in how we, or what drives us and how we behave?
Good question. Look, there's differences, but this is a true sitting on the fence comment. But underlying that, there's a lot of similarities, and I think regardless of where we've come from, where we've grown up, where we live currently, I think at its core, there's similarities there that allow us an opportunity to work on and build. And if I was to think about what the sort of the one consistent theme is across all those environments that I've worked in, the key to starting to improve areas of your life, or quality of life, or general well-being, whatever you might want to call it, mental health, probably more appropriate, is what am I doing, and how does that align with what is most important to me currently? And have I spent the time recently to identify what is most important to me currently? Because that changes over life. Think about those major life stages. Leaving home, or school, finishing school, leaving home, potentially coming back home, getting married, starting a family, changing roles, kids growing up, like all those sort of life stages. It usually require us to sort of tweak what it is that we're doing as a means to, and what is most important to us. And when we don't do that, that's often when we find this clash. I don't feel like things are traveling that well. It's because I'm trying to do what I used to do that may not be working for me right now.
Yeah, that's so interesting that we're not living a life true to, you've mentioned values, but to what's important to us right now.
Yeah. And I encourage, as a little reflective activity, you think about what you were doing 5 or 10 years ago, and what was most important to you then. How does that relate to what's going on for you right now? I know 10 years ago, my life was very different to what it is now. I wouldn't change any of that, but it's required me to refine what it is I do and how I do it, because what's important to me has changed.
Yep. So the way in which we were playing 5 or 10 years ago might have had us feeling good within ourselves from a mental health standpoint, but our values, our priorities, even our goals have changed. We need to learn to adapt and change the way we navigate and operate with a new set of, or a slightly different set of values and a different set of priorities.
Yeah. And throwing a little bit of age there, Jeremy, as well, like the way that we used to maintain our physical health and the things that we might have used to have eaten and got away with, unfortunately, we can't do that. And I think that's the way that we used to. And I think that's a really interesting comparison, this notion of how we change physically and the requirements to change, because we can't keep doing what we used to do. We need to think about that from a psychological perspective as well, because, this thing up here never stops growing. And for those of you listening, that I was putting in my head. But what we used to do to maintain our mental health needs to change, because we've got other commitments, we've got other stressors, we've got other challenges, and we need to refine that if we can't do it with ourselves, who are we doing it with? Is it a coach? Is it a psych? Is it, a significant other? And how do we do it more effectively?
Another global question that will be probably hard for you to answer, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway.
Yeah, give it a go.
What drives men? What do men want, and what keeps them from having good mental health?
I don't know about. I don't want to answer the what do men want, because I think that's not a static question.
Mm-hmm.
To what we were just speaking about. That will normally change depending on life stage. There'll be similarities, of course, throughout life, depending on what you're doing and how you're doing it. But I think, what do we want as men will change. And mate, what was the second part of the question? I've forgotten it.
What was it that keeps us from having good mental health?
Good mental health. Yeah, there we go. So, bluntly, stubbornness, I think. This resistance that we should be able to do it all. And so this resistance to engaging in the support that we might need to maintain it, or the habits before we even link in with the support to maintain our mental health. Because usually when we get busy, when we get stressed, when there's other competing demands, the stuff that we stop doing is the self-care stuff, which is usually what protects us and what maintains our mental health. So it's this terrible conundrum.
How does stress turn up and play out for men?
Usually through aggression and anger, sometimes through withdrawal and disconnecting. I was going to say disconnection, but that didn't seem right. So this process of pulling back, and that might be again contingent on how we grew up and what we learned. My habit when I'm getting stressed is I'll normally withdraw and sort of go a little bit more internal and spend a little bit more time up in my head. I've got other friends that will have difficulty managing their anger, and that's not to say they're aggressive towards other, but they're more frustrated and they snap more easily. The things that they'd normally be able to tolerate. That's you, is it? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think we without getting too deep, we probably think back to what did we observe when we were growing up, and what was modelled to us in terms of how we manage that sort of stuff. That's usually where it sits. So yeah, they're the two main groups, mate, to categorise.
Thank you. So if people listening relate to that you might disconnect under stress, or get frustrated or angry,
which also leads to usually alcohol consumption, or a little bit more substance abuse as well.
Yep. So lower levels of self-care. If we're not looking after ourselves, and some of the emotions that we're feeling in the moment, particularly under stress, aren't serving us, then that's probably a good realization to have, as motivation perhaps to make positive change and reach out for support. Dave, a lot of our farmers might spend a lot of their time, or at least some of their time, operating in relative isolation. Often we've got small teams and we're not in high-rise buildings or in dense populations. We're operating on motorbikes and in tractors, and often in remote and relatively isolated areas. You mentioned social support and changing your environment and getting things like your physical health and those things right. What would you say to those farmers that are also kind of probably not tied to their farm, but working big hours on their farm and in relative isolation? What are some of the things that they could do?
Yeah, great question. And I think when I talk about changing the environment, I don't want that to be misinterpreted as being, well, you got to get off the farm, because that's not always realistic. So it's, what are the aspects that you can change part of the environment? Is it time out during the workday? Is it and that might be 10 minutes where you're sitting down with your significant other or one of your kids or your dog, and just taking some time to stop and breathe. We don't do that enough, because this mindset is we need to keep going. And what we know about stress, if we think about it from a physiological perspective, stress is usually when our brain's working overtime. That's when it normally comes up. And if we think about our brain, essentially what it is a muscle. And like any other muscle in our body, it's not designed to work 24/7. It's not even really designed to work, a 10 or 12-hour day without breaks, without appropriate sort of time to rest, reflect, and recharge. And depending on the environment, it's what are the ways that you can give yourself little bits of downtime throughout the day. And that's not an hour. It doesn't have to be sort of 2 hours. It doesn't have to be an early finish. But how do you build in, as a part of your habits, those regular periods where you can just give your brain and your body a bit of a break? The other consideration around social support, I think, again, the comment earlier about, one of the things that COVID's taught us is we have a really great opportunity to connect with others using tech. And, even for the Luddites amongst us that may not be that familiar with it, it's getting easier to maintain connections with the people that you value, and that are important in your life outside of your immediate family. And I think, without getting too arbitrary about it, is how do we make sure that we've got time in there to connect with those people that we love, and talking about the things that may be a distraction from what might be going on the farm. And so if it's that 10 minutes where you're sitting down having a break with a dog on, in some random part of the property where there's no one else around, maybe move to a part of the property where there's a little bit of phone reception and give someone a call for that 10-minute break. The notion of physical well-being, I think it's a constant battle for most of us. But if we're not feeling right physically, I'd encourage you to look at, what are the things that you might need to change, or even let's get sort of less sort of categorical about it, and what are the things you can adjust or trial, like you would with other things that may not be working, as a means to improve to see if that has an effect on your well-being.
Thank you. So taking that same thought process one step further, I think you mentioned that you're from south of Brizzy. We've got some farmers there going through extreme adversity with floods, the likes of which I don't think we've ever seen. And I know that you played a role with the Army supporting fire-affected families a couple of years ago, Dave. What would you say to those men and women that are navigating extreme adversity at this time, just as an offer of support?
Yeah, mate. Look, look, my thoughts go out to them. It's an incredibly hard time, and the bushfires a couple of years ago, and then back in 2009, we were involved in as well with Army up in in and around King Lake. And I think the things that taught me is, and this isn't meant to be a throwaway line or a kick in the guts, but it's acknowledging that there needs to be a little bit of patience there. If we're too quick to make decisions about insurance and those aspects, sometimes we might not be making the best or most appropriate decision. So how do you sort of, for want of a better approach, how do you maintain a level of social connection and social support where you can, if it's not if it's because you cut off, how do you look to reintroduce that initially? And how do you ensure you're giving yourself time to make the right decisions as opposed to the fast decisions? Because the worst thing that we can do is probably make a rash decision without talking to the people that are important to us, which may not be most appropriate when we're under that stress and pressure. Because, again, when this thing's overloaded, our capacity to make good decisions and think critically is compromised. So what are the things that we need to do to give ourselves time and space, focusing on what's most important, which is our own well-being and the well-being of our immediate family before those big decisions need to be made.
Thanks, Dave. So one of the key things I reflect on after those fires on KI having affected so many of our members over there, that a couple of them said was reach out and accept the help that's coming your way. You mentioned being stoic and thinking that we've got to fight this battle for ourselves. Our thoughts go out to all of you who are suffering from that flood adversity and others. But just if Blaze Aid or if anyone turns up on your farm offering support, I just want to encourage you to embrace that and allow people to help you in the same way you would turn around and help others.
Yeah, it's a critical call out, mate. And when we talk about that social support, when we talk about that support from professionals, there's a lot of people out there doing good work. Don't be stubborn. If they're coming to help you, accept the help and focus on getting things back on track for your immediate, family, and that other stuff will come if you're working towards it.
Great comment, Dave. Thank you. So I'm just in rounding out just a couple of other questions, Dave. I'm hammering you with questions, but I hope
you're
that's
right, mate.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm good with it.
Have you reflect on your journey, having learned what you've learned and helped so many people apply it? How have you changed? And what do you do differently now, having learned some of the skills and tools that you have access to that perhaps you didn't 10 or 15 years ago?
Yeah, great question. Look, I can be stubborn at times, and we might put that down to the way I was, what I learned when I was growing up and the environments in which I grew up in, all pretty masculine, footy clubs and surf lifesaving clubs, and then going into the army. But I think for me, the things that I've learned as a result of the study that I've done, the roles that I've been fortunate enough to work in, the research that I've been fortunate enough to do, is we never stop learning. And for mine, whether that's in terms of the way that I practice professionally, whether that's in terms of the way that I look after myself personally, and the way that I engage with my environment, my lovely wife Han and our 9-month-old daughter, my extended family, I think, acknowledging that I need to get out of my head when I'm starting to experience a difficult period and communicate with them is my biggest learning opportunity. Because the sooner I do that, the less likely Han is to get annoyed at me. But also, those closest to us know us the best, and they'll call us out when we're having a hard time. We need to listen to them, because if they're telling us something's up, we need to accept that something's up and we need to do something about it. And for me, that's probably my biggest learning is listening to the people around me, acknowledging that I've still got another, I don't know, maybe 40 years on this planet. So I'll continue to learn through those next 40 years as well. And when we talk in that time, Jeremy, we might have something else to share.
And mate, just speaking to that, what would you say to the wonderful women in our lives about how they can turn up and support their men? Any tips there when their partners or husbands are stressed, frustrated, even angry, not on their A game? What would you say to our significant others about how they can offer support in those moments?
Yeah, there's what I'll do, mate, is I'll share a little document that we put together that talks about our 4Rs, which is kind of like an approach to how we have a conversation. And the things that it would be great for our significant others, our wives, our partners to remember is, it's how do we approach this, knowing that a lot of the time when a bloke's experiencing difficulty, an approach that may be genuine, the spotty senses are up, the walls are up, and so that might be perceived poorly. So what are the ways you can nudge and I don't want to use a too fluffy a term here, but nurturing the conversation as opposed to sort of be coming across and saying you need to change something. So how do you have that conversation in a way that highlights your concern for your significant other, calls out the behaviour that you've seen that's made you worried, and how do you work with them to highlight that you're there to support them and you want to make sure you want to work with them to get back on track, and whether that's linking them in with professional supports, whether that's linking them in with other mates or family members, it's working with them to make that change as opposed to necessarily just telling them they need to do it and not raising it in a conversation again.
So, Dave, I asked this question of a lot of my guests on Profitable Farmer. What would you say to a younger you?
It's a good question. What would I say to a younger you? Well, younger me. Look, I've never been asked that, Jeremy. I would say continue. Well, no, let me rephrase that. I would say just focus on what's working for you right now and don't worry about what the future holds, because if you're doing what's important to you and what's meaningful for you right now, the future will take care of itself.
Love it. Well, I've got so much respect for my father-in-law, and he's got this phrase that I've taken on, and I hear myself saying it to myself often. His comment is, "It'll work itself out." It'll work itself out, and I love that comment because, to your point, if I just live life true to what's important to me today, that's really all that matters. Knowing that everything else will work itself out.
Yeah. We don't want to spend too much time disengaged with what's going on around us right now, because the present moment's where we get our most satisfaction, right?
So, what are you most proud of? What are you most proud of, Dave? Sorry, about what you've already created at Mantle Health, and what the future looks like for you and your team.
Yeah. So work-wise, I'm most proud of the brand and the work that our team is doing. We've got 88% of our clients are staying engaged for 3 or more sessions compared to an industry average of 54. If we look at some of the data for people that have engaged, when they finish up with us, 91% say that their general well-being's improved. For me, at its core, what we're trying to change is the worrying male suicide rate in Australia and across the world more broadly. And if we can provide a service that assists individuals in improving what's going on for them right now and gives them the skills and strategies and capacity to improve their quality of life for the benefit of them and them around them, that's to me is incredibly valuable. And I'm so proud of what Mantle and more specifically the team that works for us are doing.
That's fun. Well said, mate. Thank you. So how can people get in touch with you and your team? What's the best way for listeners who feel like they do need to make that step and reach out and get support from where they are? What's the best way for them to make contact?
Yeah, there's a couple of ways, and I believe one of them will be through the member portal soon enough. You can go onto our website, mantlehealth.com.au. That's MANTLE health.com.au, and click on the book a time button there, and you can look at when our psychs are available. If you have questions or queries about who might be most suited to you, like from a psych perspective, if you're unsure as to how we might be able to help, you can give us a call on 1300 646 753. Or when you're on our website, you can get on the messenger chat and send us a message there. And noting we're not a crisis service, we will get back to you within one business day. We'd be more than happy to hear from you.
Dave, look, mate, thank you so much for your time and your openness, and for having a crack at some of those questions that are probably hard to be categoric around, because I do get absolutely what you mean, that every individual man or woman is unique and different, and every circumstance is different. So thanks for tolerating my line of questioning. Congratulations, mate, on all you've done already with mental health. I think it's a really important service. My bias is towards regional and rural. And absolutely, we see that, there's a real opportunity to build our relationship with you and your team, so that we can make introductions and make sure that people in regional and rural Australia are getting the support they need, both when they're less than good and when they're good, striving to be great. So thank you so much for your time, mate. Have you got a final comment to send us on our way before we round out?
Mate, my comment is just full of thanks for you, Jeremy, for the conversation we've had today, and for your listeners out there and the great work that they're doing to as the backbone of this country. I'm incredibly grateful.
Guys, thank you so much for listening. Once again, just check in. Are you on your A game? Are you anywhere near it? If you're not, don't do this battle alone. Business ownership, entrepreneurship, and running a farm can be a very lonely place. I reckon one of the worst things we can do is try and go it alone. Elite sport, elite defense, elite corporate, everyone is getting a coach, a psychologist, and the right people around them, so that they can navigate and be at their best in leadership, in entrepreneurship, in farming, and all of that. And, it's great to have time with Dr. Dave, digging a little bit deeper into psychology and what it means and how it can turn up to help each of you. So if you need that support, encourage you to reach out to Dave and his team. I'll share the details in the written intro with this podcast, or reach out to Farm Owners Academy, and we're happy to make an introduction. So take care, guys. And again, for those of you dealing with adversity, floods and others, our thoughts and prayers and best wishes go out to you. Dave, thanks so much for your time, mate. Take care. And to all of you, speak soon. Bye for now.